Welcome to the Bladtcast. As always, I am Christian Bladt, and as is always a delight, joined by another Christian, Christian Toto, who we do often talk to around this time of the year, but we're not talking Oscars, not just yet. Christian Toto, thanks for coming back on the Bladtcast.
Thanks for having me. And I think you may be the only Christian in my inner circle. I feel like I don't run into that name very often, which I use, as a kid, I thought this is a very common name. I don't think it is as common as I thought.
No, it isn't really. I mean, it was, I went to a small school, but there were like six Chris's in my class. So I was very particular. I'm like, no, my name is Christian. It was like, don't lump me together with, with those other idiots.
Mr.
And
Christian.
yeah. And then, Christian Slater came on the scene and then the name got a little bit cooler, so that helped.
Then he faded away, so it gave it less cool again.
Yeah. The run from Heathers to Mr. Robot was a good one. Anyway, so Christian, you have a book called Virtue Bombs: How Hollywood Got Woke and Lost Its Soul. And I want to talk a lot about that book. But one of the things you start off with in the book is something that I don't think I realized. And you, when you were younger, you had the job that I just always wished I'd had. You worked in a video store. So you were basically, your neighborhood's Quentin Tarantino.
Without the fame, fortune, and talent. Yes, that's exactly.
Well, he did use his credit cards to make his first movie. So, he didn't have the fame right away.
That's right. I use my credit cards to pay the rent. So we're very similar.
It's not that different. And and you can define the era when you worked, I've talked
Sure.
about worked in record stores and things like that. What were like the hottest movies you remember from your tenure there, where it's like somebody always coming in to be like, do you have this? And it's like, no, of course we don't have this. Everybody wants this.
The one movie that stands out above all others is the one that changed our store policy. It was Dirty Dancing. When that movie came out, the reserved list went kablooey. Now, we had a thing where basically you can say, hey, I want to see Dirty Dancing on Saturday. We'd write your name down and we'd hold it for you on Saturday. And then, but it started to stretch into like weeks and weeks because everybody wanted it. So we had a policy now only 1 week in advance. So if our whole Dirty Dancing allotment was filled up for a week, you got to wait a couple of days. And once things loosen up again, so that was a big one. Hunt for October was pretty powerful. Raising Arizona, but just in my heart and mind. But,
right. So you kept signing people up to take Raising Arizona, and they're like, "What's that? I don't know if I want to see that."
You want to hear something Rain Man-esque? 2690, 2691. Those are the two copies of Raising Arizona we had, and the numbers affixed to them.
I can understand how something like that would stick with you. Absolutely. Oh, that's so funny. So I assume that, you have a job like that. You have a love of film going into it, but sort of being around it all the time, you must have discovered films that you wouldn't have otherwise. I mean, the beauty of the old video store was, going in and walking around, and you can do that on Netflix now, but just physically looking around, and it's grouped in sections, and a lot of times the people who worked there would put like their picks on a shelf. So you must have found some great stuff that you wouldn't have found otherwise if you had never worked in a video store, right?
I loved movies prior to it. It was more of a happenstance that I got the job. It wasn't a direct, oh, I love movies, let me go find this gig.
Right.
But once I was in there, it kind of changed my relationships with movie art because I was inundated with all the posters, which were constantly, circulating or evolving and revolving.
Yeah, sure.
Also, the boxes themselves, from the boxes that got bleached out by sunlight to just ones I'll never forget. Like it just was so ingrained in me. But I did see films that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. I think maybe the one that jumps out to me was Metropolitan. I think it was Whit Stillman's first movie.
Oh, okay, sure.
And for some reason, I loved that movie, and it was in my rotation. There were certain movies I would watch again and again, and then even if they were a little bit PG-13 or even R, I knew the bad places in the movies, so I would actively cough, and then that would cancel out the curse or something. Or there was a scene in Christmas Vacation where there's sort of a maybe part of a woman's upper body is shown, and I'd either fast forward through that, or I'd somehow maybe do like a magician's trick where I deflect. So yeah. So for all those reasons, it was a lot of fun. It was easy. And the best part was I worked often a day shift during the summertime and no one came in. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
just sit around and watch movies. And then whenever you put a movie in the TV in the VCR and you popped it on, the chances of that movie getting rented becomes 10 to 20 fold, because all of a sudden you look like you're interested in the movie, they're
Yeah.
caught by surprise, and I'm always like cursing under my breath because like I want to watch the rest of this. Don't take this away from
No, I'm gonna have to give it to you.
me.
Yeah. It's funny. I talked about this somewhere within the last year. We had the comedian Zach Amico on, and he does, he is a connoisseur of bad horror movies. He likes good horror movies, but, he loves the bad ones even more.
Me too.
And we talked about the VHS for a film called Frankenhooker. And this sounds like it might have been the era where you were there. Now, with the name, it might sound like, it might be, one of those movies that's behind the curtain,
Yeah.
but it was a little bit more of like a hard PG-13. It was probably an R, but like a soft R, you know what I'm saying? And so she's on the cover of the VHS box, and there was a button you'd push, and she would just say, "Want a date?" And they had to put it like away from the people, not because of the movie, just because they were tired, in the local video store in my town. They didn't want people hitting the button all the time, which was me.
I'm
Yeah.
embarrassed. I've never seen that, nor the VHS box. I don't know how that one slipped by, but
Wow.
it
Well,
did.
you know what? Maybe you worked at a more higher caliber
Oh no.
video store than the one that I would go to in my town. Yeah, I was in a town of like 3,000 people, a resort town in Orange County, New York, called Greenwood Lake. So yeah, like my graduating high school class was 63 people, and that's two towns put together. And yet
Oh my gosh.
we had four video stores. So and they all did well enough that they were around for a while.
That's right.
But in any case, so that, and I don't think I realized that you started, the journalism side of film, sort of film critique and film reporting. I didn't realize you started that at the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. That was something I learned about you.
Actually, a Tribune Review. That was
Oh,
the Post Gazette was the bigger paper.
right.
I was part of the smaller paper, but
All right. Well, I'm proud of myself for remembering the name of one of the Pittsburgh papers. But
you
yeah,
got
so
it.
you did it in Pittsburgh, because when we first crossed paths was the old Dennis Miller radio show. You were writing for the Washington Times at that
Yes.
point. So and I love the part of the story is that they had somebody that covered film. So you just kind of hung around and waited. You tried to Wally Pip the actual film reporter.
And it really didn't work. I got a couple of reviews in,
Right.
but I was mostly involved with the entertainment desk. So I was doing a lot of play reviews, opera reviews, all sorts of nonsense. But when I knew his vacation was lurking, I jumped into the void and said, me. So I got a few reviews that way.
Yeah, no, but that's great. And so a book like Virtue Bombs, it's it doesn't it's not like it writes itself, because I'm sure you spent a lot of time writing it, but our pal Dennis Miller would talk about, it's certain times that we live in. You just need to be mildly observant, and there's really a lot to take in, and there's a lot of what you read. It's a lot. This is one of those head nodding books where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember this. And in a way, it feels like, when you hear that when they paint the Golden Gate Bridge, it takes them so long, they get to the end and they got to go back to the other side and start again. So this feels like one of those books that you could have turned it in and been like, all right, but I have to now do the next 20 chapters. And, even in the time since you sent it to me, Rogan became such a bigger story, and there's just there's always something. So talk about, if there was one incident that was the breaking point where you were like, all right, this is going to make a book that I feel like I need to write this.
Well, I dial back a little bit. That was one of my
Sure.
fears when I wrote the book, because I thought once the book goes to bed, as they say,
Yeah.
what happens if there's really great stories that are, happening after that? What do I do? And I was able to update things a little bit, but really it's the culture that we're talking about. So whether the example is Rogan or Chappelle or J.K. Rowling or whatever, it's all part of a piece. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to describe these specific situations and hopefully kind of draw some connections between them and kind of take a larger view of what's going on in the culture. So I don't need every possible example to kind of illustrate what's going to happen tomorrow, because what's going to happen tomorrow, because it's what happened yesterday. As far as the book itself goes, I was talking to a publisher about an unrelated topic, about some story I was working on. And he said, oh, by the way, I know you, I've been following your work. we should do a book together. I thought, oh, that's very flattering. I've never written a book and really don't want to. But when he mentioned that, I'm like, well, I probably should. You always got to get just do one at least, and then I'm done. And I am done. But I thought, well, what I write about, because I don't want to, there are certain topics that are interesting, but maybe they don't have legs, or maybe there are other ones where you can get all the information out in 3 chapters and you're done. But the whole woke culture, this whole clamping down on free speech, it's what I've been really passionate about. And in an odd way, it's odd because I'm a right of center film critic, but I think much of what I'm discussing isn't right of center. It's more about expression and creativity and freedom and free speech. And so that attracted me as well. I mean, just to be another kind of Sean Hannity is very successful. He does what he does. He's far greater than me in many ways. But I didn't want to just write a political book in a sense. I wanted to be sort of something a little bit different than that. So, and what I hope is, and I don't even know if I got through with it all the way. I think it shines through at times. I do love movies. I do love Hollywood. I do love meeting the actors who make this all possible. And I don't want to be a crank, and I don't want to be a scold. But what I'm seeing now is really destructive, I think. And I think it's not just within the industry, but it sort of bleeds out. So into the world at large. So, I want that to come out as well. So I think there are people on the right who are, red meat, hardcore, angry. And, at times I've become that, and it may be unavoidable, but I also want to kind of put some uplift, which I do at the end. And also just say, the reason I steered my dumb career in this direction is because I love this stuff. I mean, I really, when I love introducing dumb, stupid horror movies to my kids and talking about it and sharing it with them. It's great. We were just watching Shallow Hal a couple of days ago, and I told my son, one of the things that women like in dating is confidence. And the main character was kind of building his confidence and becoming more attractive to women. Like, there's a life lesson in this silly movie, with all the fat jokes and all the nonsense. So I this stuff matters to me. And I think I'm rambling, but one quick other point. I don't, this was not where I envisioned my career. This is not where I envisioned my life. And I don't really think of myself as a culture warrior. And it's odd because I worked at Breitbart years ago, 10 years ago after Andrew Breitbart passed. And I think they were more hard charging, more culture warrior driven. And I wasn't that person. I kind of think the culture made me into that person. That's where I am today.
Yeah, and I think you've I've seen you post about this on social media that your wife and your politics are not very well aligned, and I think
just slightly askew.
Yeah, but I think it's important because it's so easy to forget that how easy it used to be like, I don't really agree with you on that, and you can not just, share a meal with someone, you can share a life with someone if you don't agree on all that stuff. And it's, look, the last few years, I'm counting all 4 of the Trump years and the past one, so these last 5 years, it's been very hard to disagree with people. And when you can find somebody that it's, and that's why, you reference Andrew Breitbart, and people remember Andrew Breitbart in a very specific way. And the way that I remember him best, my favorite times with him are spending an afternoon at Dodger Stadium watching baseball. And, sometimes you talk about politics, but, and when it's not your whole life, and, and he loved to talk, somebody posted a memory of when Andrew guest hosted the Dennis Miller Show, and we had a couple of the guys from the band Fishbone in there, and they did not see eye to eye politically, but he loved the band so much. It was a great conversation, and it's very hard to find those things anymore. And a difference of opinion is immediately shoved out the door. And in a place like Hollywood, the difference of opinion is usually, I'm not talking about your Alex Jones survivors, your Alex Jones subscribers, sort of, even you're talking center right, that can be considered crazy, and just like, I don't think that there's a place for you. And you talk to people for the book, right, who had meetings, and over the course of time, they realized, like, this isn't going to fit my project, what they want to do. Right.
Yeah, the behind the scenes chapter is interesting and chilling too.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that's one chapter I wish I could expand a little more, because there've been more advances and more examples of what's happening within the industry. I think I'm a white guy, and it didn't impact me like it did people of color, but I can look at Hollywood. I can look at older movies from 10, 20, 30 years ago and say, gee, they're not that diverse. Where were the sort of the people of color, behind the scenes, directing, writing? They weren't there. And I think Hollywood has a real guilty conscience, and I think they deserved a lot of it for not being as inclusive. But I think what's happening now is this aggressive overcorrection where I know a white comedian who's very funny and charming and does a lot of different voices, and he should be a draw, but his agents and reps say you're a white guy, can't do much with you because they don't want you now. That's wrong. We don't want to go. We don't want to swing the pendulum that way. We want to say, hey, Jordan Peele, I think he might have a good script in that Get Out story. Let's get that out there and see what the public thinks. We don't want there's a white guy who happens to be male and straight. We're not going to give him an opportunity. That's wrong. So there's got to be a happy medium.
Yeah, I mean, one of the more interesting things, one of the groundswells of support that didn't build was there was this idea when Disney first announced that Jon Favreau was going to do a Star Wars TV series, and it was going to be The Mandalorian. And there was, well, why did they give this to a white male? And then it's like, well, because look at his track record.
Yeah,
and then in hindsight, it's like the only thing that Star Wars that people have been able to agree upon in maybe 30 years is the series that he made.
Yes.
And and look, I think when you hear stuff like the NFL only meets with black head coaches for the sake of that they have to, that doesn't sound right. You should really consider people. And I am going to assume that it wasn't like Jon Favreau was the only person they considered. I'm sure they thought about it. And then if you see the number of women that directed episodes of that show, and just, a lot of what they've done as a company with some of their other projects, he was the right fit for it. Yeah. And that's one example where it didn't happen. But there are plenty of other examples where people have had to turn down roles. I mean, it turned into a joke how many times Scarlett Johansson was playing a role of someone that was supposed to be Asian, or you write about the trans character she was going to play. And look, I think she's a great actress. I think that different people playing different kinds of parts, was more accepted. It was okay to play a deaf character if you weren't deaf. And, I think that I think there's an extent to which I think inclusion is great. And I think it's always worth to consider people, but you should ultimately hire the best person for a job. And that doesn't always seem to be the case in front of the camera, behind the scenes. And look, at the same time, like when you're doing, when the movie version of In the Heights, I don't think that there were probably a lot of like white actors that should have been like, I can't believe they didn't cast me for that, because it wasn't about you. The West Side Story that was just out, it wasn't about you, so it's fine. And I don't know. I think that there's a point where I think you're right. The course correction was good, but just overcompensating it has led to a situation where I honestly don't know how you get out of it. I don't know how you get away from, can we tell this story about, just a white male, and, and look, some of it's money, because you had an example in there somewhere that was one of those behind this, it's in the same chapter where it's like, well, what can we do for people in China? And I think sometimes stuff like that is based on inclusion, but when it comes to China, it's also like, that's like billions of dollars we need to try and chase.
Yeah.
And it's also misguided, but that one, at least you're like, well, that's the cold hard facts of money. So how again, you've talked to people for that chapter, you talked to people in different aspects of production. It seemed like it must be incredibly frustrating to go up against, one, our studio, our executives are too woke. Two, we have to be able to sell this idea to, a country that doesn't even like our country, really.
Yeah. I know I'm here to plug my book, but there's a great book out just a few weeks ago called Red Carpet. It's a fascinating, staggering look at the Hollywood-China connection.
Right.
And that's sort of a topic too big to even get into here in greater detail, but I highly recommend that book. But yeah, and that's why a lot of the woke stuff drives me crazy, because if at the end of the day, the people who are adherents to this woke philosophy, if they really want to make a better world, if they want to make a more inclusive world, if they wanted to kind of make society a kinder place, then they'd be more consistent. Yeah. And their insane inconsistencies tell you that that's not really what they want. I could say that Hollywood is noble and pure if they're fighting for gay rights, But then when a gay character or a scene is snipped out of a Chinese movie, they all hush and they go quiet. Which is a guys, you got to be consistent. So
Yeah,
that's
I
part
mean,
of
a
his
good example
frustration.
to get it back to Disney was the posters for the J.J. Abrams Star Wars movies.
Mm.
John Boyega would always be really small in the
Yes.
back, and it would be the same picture, but they would move it around.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's they're very quick to understand, to not even understand, to just look the other way for people that have particularly deep pockets. Comment in the chat that if somebody said this about me, I would be okay. And Dominicus Saxon, is it just me or does Christian Toto look like Edward Norton? I
I
mean,
met him once. He was much taller. I'm like 5'9", so everyone's tall to me. But
yeah, well, but on this show we don't talk about Fight Club, so we just have to move on from there.
uh,
And our pal Sam Whitfield, I'm not super far right. I love movies and cinema, and Sam's been on the show talking about James Bond movies and some others. But I don't feel like there's a place for me in the entertainment industry. And Sam, I don't think you're the only person that feels that way. I
yeah.
mean, there is, people are quick to point to like, well, you had your time, you had all of those movies, but I think that it overlooks the fact that there's just the idea that I see a lot of children's programming in my home because I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's great for my daughter that there's so much more focus on girls content,
Mm.
and some of the shows and the characters that she likes. Of course, if she watches Paw Patrol, her favorite is the girl, and then yeah, I get it, it's fine. But it was a little harder for my son, because, and I don't know, your kids are a little bit older, but I don't know if you ran into this where it's like, well, where's the show that's like, and really the real task is like, can I find a show that they both like to watch? And that is almost impossible.
Yeah.
But
My older son is 13,
yeah,
and he talks a lot about sort of the woke issues in entertainment as we're watching them. And I've actually been really careful because my wife is left and I'm right. I don't
sure.
go directly into that conversation many times. So I asked him recently, where are you getting some of that? He says, oh yeah, my friends at school talk about it.
Oh
So
yeah,
like if a character is a certain ethnicity, their storyline may go in a certain direction, like that kind of a thing, which is actually, when you get too involved with this, which sadly I am, you can kind of sense where certain plots and characters are going, because you say, well, that's a person of color. The writer may not be willing to make him or her a bad person. So chances are he's going to be a hero or she's going to be a hero. And often you're right. So, or there's a white male who might seem like, well, I don't know if he's the villain, but they probably would more be likely making that guy the villain just because the way this whole sentiment
yeah.
works. And you're often right. So sort of a side subject, but yeah, I think it's the overcorrection that's
Yeah,
exasperating.
it's just another way. And again, it's, as someone who has a daughter now, it's great that there's stuff for her, but
Mhm.
you just don't want your son to also get left behind,
Yeah.
and as a side hustle, I do read some coverage for, let's just say, a major studio. I read books, I read screenplays, and it's very clear what they're going for. In terms, it's a lot of it's for children's programming. It's a
Mhm.
lot of female characters that are some ethnicity, and I think that is probably growing again
Mhm.
your audience in terms of just having more money coming in, having diverse, and always merchandising. But it's interesting. It's like, that's really what this studio is focused on, all
Yeah.
the time. It's like everything I read, it basically feels like it's a very narrow area of stories they're trying to tell. Some of them are very good. I mean,
Mhm.
one of them, I don't even think, it's not really a disclosure because it's based on a book. It's like it's a high school African American girl, and she goes back in time in like her parents' lives, and it's very similar to Back to the Future. But I'm like, well, this is a great story. I
Mhm.
hope that somebody makes this, because that
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
great. Because I think the funny thing about Back to the Future, and I didn't expect to talk about this, is you think about it now. So in that movie, Marty McFly goes back 30 years to 1955. Now we're more than 30 years past that movie. so if we go back 30 years, we're going back to 1985. Anyway, that was not what I had you on to talk about, but it's just sort of, you feel like the focus is, and look, I think a part of it is great. My wife is Chinese American. She was elated when we saw Shang-Chi, and she was sad that she's like, I wish I'd had something like this growing up. I wish there had been an Asian superhero. You know, it was really just Mulan. It was like,
and that's something I can't appreciate directly because that was not my experience.
Sure.
Another reason you talk about steering in one direction, this is what they're going for. There's never been a point in our history where there's been more platforms and services and channels and outlets, and everyone's creating original content. There should be something for everybody. So the fact that if Sam chimed in about being right of center and there's no home for him, that's a real black mark on an industry. If half the country, which is kind of right of center, half is left, that there's no place for them. There should be. We've never had such a cornucopia of outlets and content. Why can't there be a select amount of shows? If you want to, even if you kind of double down on left of center themes or memes or whatever, there should be plenty of content for the rest of us. This is why the whole Gutfeld show is so not surprising. Oh, every late night show is left of center. You put one right of center, it might do well. Gee, who saw that coming? Well, everybody saw it coming, except Hollywood, or they didn't want to see it coming. So,
right. And I think it's a great story because obviously, having had Gutfeld on as a guest on the radio and over the years, it's great to see, just for him as the person, but also it is something that you're just like, well, yeah, why is nobody else trying this? And I mean, I guess the answer as to why, because they don't want to speak to those people,
And by the way, Greg is very talented, very funny, has built his audience. He's the perfect fit for this. But I think you could have a mediocre talent, not someone as good as Greg, and he or she may still thrive in that arena just because. What else you got? If I'm a right of center person, I'm falling asleep at night. Do I want the Colbert, rat-a-tat-tat of talking points? I don't want that, So.
No, and I won't attribute this to you, but let's just say that there are mediocre talents in some avenues that do really well in, I don't know, subscription services. I'm not naming anyone, but there are people who do really well. And you're like, yeah, because, and you're absolutely right. Like, you don't have to be the Dave Chappelle or the Louis C.K. on stage of the right. You can be, not a headliner. You could be a middle, as they say in the comedy business, and because just people feel like, well, yeah, absolutely. And that's the beauty of podcasting. I mean, as I've found over the last decade, is just there's enough people out there that if you find the right niche, people are excited to hear what you have to say. We referenced The Mandalorian before, and I did want to talk about, it's an important point in your book, what happened to Gina Carano, who was on that show. And I have to be quick to point out that our mutual friend Larry O'Connor, he was really all worked up when that happened, and he said that she was the best thing on the show. And I had to say, like, Larry, you can be mad. This is not right. She's not the best thing on the show. The best thing on the show is the guy in the Boba Fett uniform. Second best is Baby Yoda. But she was a great part of that show, and it continued without her in the form of the episodes of the Boba Fett series that were Mandalorian episodes essentially. But it is a loss to have it. And reading that chapter, I remember thinking, I'm like, yeah, but Disney did tell her, like, you should back off before they did it. But there's plenty of other instances where people don't back off, but because of what their politics are, what happened to her isn't what happens. Personally, I just feel like you should never invoke the Holocaust in anything if you work for a company like Disney. But that she felt, and she's entitled to feel more strongly than that. But talk a little bit about, your thoughts on that and why that's such an important part of the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case example. First of all, there's so many things. And by the way, there's an excerpt about the Gina Carano chapter. It's, it may be for Real Clear Politics. I think that's where it went. I had a couple of excerpts in different arenas, but you can get most of that chapter on online right now. Okay, so here's an actress. She appears either right or center, or even just sort of a a rabble rouser in some of the things that she shares on social media.
Sure. Yeah.
But she's not vicious. She's not cruel. She's not wishing injuries on people. But she kind of defies the groupthink, and she's warned not to do it by her company, and she keeps on doing it. Now, you could say, well, they warned her, and then she did it. And I agree. Holocaust, I so rarely go there. Although I think what she was saying was more empathetic. It wasn't like sharp elbowed. But I just point to Bette Midler. Bette Midler is currently shooting or wrapping up a Disney Plus movie, a Hocus Pocus sequel, which I can't wait not to see because I missed the first one. And she has said horrible things on Twitter consistently.
Yeah.
And she's wished ill on Senator Rand Paul multiple times, cheering on the guy who nearly killed him. He had some significant injuries from that attack. Just Google it if you want to check
Yeah, I mean, that
out.
wasn't like, Letterman used to always joke about the woman who broke into his house.
Right.
It wasn't like that.
No,
when I first heard about his neighbor, I'm like, oh, okay. And then it was very serious. Yeah, absolutely.
So, when someone like that is not warned, is not castigated, is not punished by Disney, in fact, they just ignore it. And yet Gina Carano, who did something that was less mean, is kicked out. It's obvious what's going on, So you've got Disney, which ignores the Uyghur Muslims in China and plays footsie with China to get the Chinese money, and then they've got a female character, an actress, who says things that they don't like, but maybe half the country either agrees with or doesn't have any problem with, and they fire her. It was a terrible situation. And I contribute to the Daily Wire, so I have a little dog in this fight, but I would be saying this even if I didn't. I'm just stunned and happy that they kind of swooped in and said, hey, well, let's get in the Gina Carano business. We'll make a movie with you. You can produce it. I mean, I think that was wonderful because it's wrong what they did to her. And I want to just mention quickly that the Hollywood feminists, the people, the strong, the power, they marched 4 times during the Trump years. They didn't say a bloody word when Gina Carano was fired. Yeah. And they are cowards. And how dare they? Because they should have had her back. They should have been on the front line saying, you know what, I don't even agree with what Gina Carano said, but you can't fire someone for a social media message like that. She's allowed to have thoughts and opinions like we all do. And by the way, Pedro Pascal, who is the Mandalorian, used a Nazi reference against Trump voters roughly around the same time that Gina Carano did. And of course, nothing happened to him because you can make fun of Trump supporters. That's Hollywood. That's woke. It's all about power and politics. It's not about making the world a better place.
Yeah, and I would love to be able to sit here and say to you like, oh no, it's not that cut and dried. Unfortunately, it is. It really is. Yeah, and I wanted to obviously you talked about your time at Breitbart, so you have a couple of great quotes from the great John Nolte in your book. And I actually wrote this down word for word in my notes. I want to make sure I get it right. So as he's talking to you, he says, we're in a terrible place where busybodies, snitches, and pious scolds, the very people Hollywood taught us to laugh at for 100 years, are portrayed as virtuous. Yeah. And first of all, I mean, and nobody turns a phrase like John Nolte, and it's always a nice reminder. And I haven't spoken to him in a little while, but when he reviewed the Sopranos movie, The Many Saints of Newark, I had to write to him because I was just like, hey, you like every thought in my head you put there, and you said it so much better than I ever could. But talk a little bit about that. I mean, he's absolutely right. It's like the squares are in charge now, and it's done terrible things to comedy. I have a comedian friend who feels very strongly. She says cancel culture isn't real. It's accountability culture. And I think there's a kernel of what she says I do agree with. I'm like, but also it is real because you have people who basically are determined to really destroy people. I mean, Shane Gillis, who's very funny, got hired for SNL, and he didn't get fired because someone at NBC found out about something that he said on a podcast. It was just, let's just say it was this guy who lives for this kind of stuff and was really quick to turn it all over and make sure it was all public. And then, and that's not the first person that happened to. And interestingly enough, Andrew Yang, who ran for president, also ran for mayor of New York City, spoke with him, and he's had nice things to say, sort of about Shane Gillis, about who he really is, and not just making a bad joke. Making a bad joke and look, there's a line. There's always a line, but in general, it seems like you can't even bomb anymore. In terms of like just a joke that just doesn't land well. I'm not talking about Michael Richards up on stage using the N word.
Yeah.
But just like, all right, it's saying, so talk a little bit about this sort of, I'm using Shane Gillis as the example,
Mhm.
but just this idea of, we don't want anybody who pushes the envelope. We don't want anybody who's edgy. We would just, can we just get some vanilla talent and go ahead and put that on TV?
Well, it's so sad. It's one of the reasons why there are no. I guess Free Guy is probably the last big screen comedy that was pretty successful, pretty legitimately funny.
Yeah, I
Certainly
thought it
not
was funny. Yeah,
not an
absolutely.
R-rated movie, but sort of
Yeah.
the days of the bawdy R-rated comedy are almost over. Vacation Friends was on Hulu, but it was pretty weak. But I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, a comedian is not your mayor, your governor, or your president. They have no power. They have no sway. They're trying to make us laugh. Sometimes they go too far. Sometimes they try things. They often say that comedians use the stage as like a workshop. They'll tell a joke today and maybe it bombs, and then tomorrow they'll tweak it, maybe it does better. Then the next week they try it with a different audience, different phrasing, and it kills. That's the way comedy often works, and I think that often comedians will, and not everyone. Jerry Seinfeld is not changing the world. He's not sort of changing the way we think about certain topics, but Dave Chappelle sure does. His not his last special, but the one before it. I remember thinking, gosh, that joke made me uncomfortable. Or that joke I disagreed with what he was saying. But like, hey, who cares? I can disagree with Dave Chappelle and he can disagree with me, but he also is challenging the way I perceive certain ideas and arguments and making me sort of think about them again and maybe in a fresh way. And I think sometimes the best the comedians do that. The best satirists do it. When you watch Stephen Colbert now, it's so toothless because you know exactly what he's going to say. You know the exact angle, and often it's not even remotely funny. So we're in this weird place where comedians are held to this extreme high standard, and yet I'm still aghast that New York. I'm from New York. I'm a New York native. The fact that New Yorkers didn't throw Governor Cuomo out on his bum instantly when there were a potpourri of scandals, one more
Yeah.
disgusting than the next, were raining down on him. And he's already kind of flirting with a little bit of a political comeback, which is very possible. So you've got a Shane Gillis who said his Asian, the rant he went on was bizarre. It wasn't really remotely funny. I don't know what he was doing. I did hear that there may have been some context that helped explain it a bit, but let's just say
Yeah.
it wasn't.
Yeah. But
It
even
was,
without it,
yeah,
yeah.
even without it, if you followed him on his day-to-day journeys, my guess, my hunch, is that whenever he meets an Asian person, he probably treats them like every other person and doesn't discriminate. And you can tell a joke that's maybe racially charged, and it doesn't mean you're a bigot or a monster. It may mean you thought it was funny. You may just wanted to upset people. Sometimes comedians just like say the wrong thing, or because you're expected then to say the right thing. This misdirection is a key part of comedy too. A great example is Roseanne Barr. She had that disgusting tweet about Valerie Jarrett. But then I heard, a little while later that Norm Macdonald said that, when we were in the writing room, Roseanne would go out of her way to hire people of color in the writing
Yeah.
room. What matters more? The superstar who hires people from different backgrounds to elevate them, or one gross tweet for which she apologized immediately for? And it's such a sick society we live in now that the tweet obviously matters more than hiring people of color.
Yeah, no, and that's really, I think that defines it right there. It's what happens on Twitter and social media is the scales of justice way heavier when it's
Yeah.
the social media misdeed. One of the things you reference is that there was this documentary a couple of years ago, the problem with the poo, and that led to The Simpsons, recasting the voice of Apu from Hank Azaria. And I thought, I was reading your book at the time, and a week or two ago, a comedian named Akash Singh, who's very funny and who also had just the great luck that he was booked on Joe Rogan's show after the Monday after the weekend where there was the video that he had to address. So good for him. But he is of Indian descent. And the reason why I mention it is because he has sort of this idea of like, no, bring back Apu. Like he was like, this was the only Indian guy on TV. And by the way, it's like the only Indian character I've ever seen that's in a happy marriage with an
Mhm.
Indian woman. And they have 8 kids on the show, you know. And Apu is probably the smartest person in Springfield, despite the fact that he works at the Quickie Mart. So he's this great character. And I think when that first came up, the impression was that the character was going to go away. And then it's like, well, nobody, I don't think that helps anybody. And then when Hank Azaria gets to a point where he's like, well, I can't do it anymore. You know, I understand him feeling the pressure of it. And I honestly, I haven't watched The Simpsons in quite a while, so I don't know how the new voice sounds, but
I don't think there is an Apu anymore.
okay.
We'll
So
have to
yeah,
double check that, but I kind of think it became so radioactive. I don't know if he's back because
okay.
I don't remember hearing any, Fred Jones is now the new voice of
Right,
Apu,
sure.
like kind of a thing. I don't think that news cycle happened. I
Okay.
think
No,
he's
no,
dropped
and
him.
you're right. I thought that maybe that's where they were going, but that's kind of the point. If he's gone, that's the worst thing that can happen to it, because you had, like, even now, you still don't have a lot of representation of Indian characters. And and Akash Singh was talking about it. It's a lot of times it's an Indian guy who is in an arranged marriage that they hate, and they secretly want to be with a white woman. That's a story that he's seen a lot. And it's like, well, this is great. This is a really happy guy. And they have 8 kids, and it's, so you can really, I think, including Apu into it. Yes, it's a very stereotyped sort of character, the voice. I understand that criticism, but it was good representation in the 90s to have Apu on our television,
And
and
also, I
then,
think we emphasize the impact of Apu. Like, oh,
yeah,
so he got bullied, but I'm gonna guess that those kids were gonna bully him anyway. They weren't like just sweet, nice kids, and then they saw Apu and
yeah,
go, "Man, that Indian kid in my class, I'm gonna beat the heck out of that kid because I
yeah.
saw Apu." They would have just called him short, or called him fat, or called him ugly, or like I don't. This whole thing where we have to kind of watch so carefully. We live in a free culture. We live in free speech zone, and we can tell these stories. And obviously, there was like almost no, to my knowledge, backlash against Apu until that comedian did that documentary. I don't think everyone was raging against him, and I think he was a small business owner, by the way. Throw that in the win
Yeah,
column.
he owns
You
a
know,
Quickie Mart, and I mean, he got to meet with Paul McCartney in an episode, because they were both vegetarians, and I
yeah,
mean, it's like, yeah, Apu had a great run, and I think it's great that, and it's funny because I remember Akash Singh's name because I just heard him. I don't remember the comedian who did that documentary,
yeah,
and I think having that conversation is fine. It's just unfortunate that that anything. I think it's great to have conversations where people call things into question, when
yeah,
people
yeah,
disagree. That's fine. It's very hard to do anymore, as we were talking about earlier.
yeah.
But it's when people take up in arms about things that it's like, okay, so we're going to do away with that. And look, I mentioned before, my wife is a Chinese American, and uh, she grew up watching John Hughes movies, specifically 16 Candles. And there is that character Long Dok Dong in there where it is incredibly, it has not aged well. It is a
No,
very racist character.
yeah,
She would see that with her family and they would laugh, but then she thought about it when she got a little older and she felt bad. And I'm like, well, that's certainly worth talking about.
mm,
I don't know that that should mean that no one's able to watch 16 Candles anymore,
yeah,
and
yeah. I don't think
I
that
don't
character
quite
gets old
know,
today.
what the fix is. You referenced in the book about putting some warnings ahead of some movies, and boy, Disney did that with everything on Disney Plus.
Hmm.
But and I think, putting a warning ahead of something, if you don't change the content, I think it should be okay. And honestly, it's like when we were kids and you'd put the parental advisory stickers on a CD and you're like, well, clearly that's the best CD in the store. I want that one. But what do you think sort of about, I don't like the idea of going back and removing old content. I mean,
Yeah,
there's probably exceptions, but off the top of my head, I mean, it's like, I think there's value. In a TV class I had in college, we watched an episode of the TV Amos and Andy show. And I think it was important. I think
yeah.
people should be able to see stuff like that and at least understand it.
Well, I mean, I think the fact that we get triggered and we need a safe space for dealing with controversial or edgy or dated or racist material, I mean, I think we should be adults about it and say, okay, let's have the discussion. Why would this not happen today?
Yeah,
What elements of that show were offensive? I mean, we should all be adults and we should all have thicker skin because life is bloody hard. My wife went through cancer last year. We've been dealing with a new cancer scare that we got to, just before I picked up the microphone, it's looking better than I thought it was.
that's
We're all
great.
scared to death. I don't give a damn about a joke that offends me. There's such bigger stuff at play, and maybe it's a sign of societal decay that we ignore the bad things, the truly bad things, and we focus on these nonsensical things that matter. And as far as the warnings go, though, I think if they happened in a vacuum, I don't think I'd care. But they're not happening in a vacuum. Gone with the Wind got yanked briefly from
Yeah, that's
HBO
true.
Max. Gone. It
Yeah.
did come back and with warnings and a whole like teachable little screed at the beginning. But we're not looking at a culture where it's forgiving. I mean, the late 80s and the early 90s when those record labels went on, it was a different time. And you could argue back and forth whether it was right, it was wrong. And I think there still should be a movie about, John Denver, Frank Zappa, and Dee Snider heading up to Capitol Hill. I think that'd be amazing. So use that, Hollywood, if you want. But
Yeah, no, I agree. And of course, by the way, just the quick aside, it's very easy to forget that the villain in that story, of course, was Tipper Gore.
Yeah.
the well, I don't know what you are when you're the vice president's wife. Are you the second lady? But anyway,
there was some bipartisan labeling, I think, of that era. So
yeah.
maybe that was a sign of good things that we all got along.
Yeah, everybody could agree that you shouldn't listen to the Twisted Sisters "Stay Hungry" album.
But there are Dr. Seuss books you can no longer buy. There are I think it was Ong and Bach. It's a kid's book. I think I have it in the house. We bought it before the cancellation acts came down. That's now been deemed offensive.
Yeah, we have if I Ran the Zoo, which is one. There's it was a gift from friends, and then I realized I'm like, this book is worth like $900.
There are blackface episodes which have been canceled, gone from history. So we're living in a time where if the woke movement gets supercharged again, like it did after the George Floyd death, who knows what goes next? Who knows what goes away? So the warning labels are they kind of scare me. I got to be honest with you because it I think the slippery slope argument is often silly, but I don't think we're living in a slippery slopes or silly time. I think we're seeing slippery slopes that are coated with with Vaseline and all sorts of lubricants to make it even faster. I just do.
Yeah, and I think that look at service like Disney Plus. If we have separate logins. We have one for my kids, and as I mentioned, they're 6 and 4. So there's content that doesn't show up in there.
Yeah.
Interestingly, sometimes it's surprising what I have to then go log into mine to find. But in a way, I appreciate the attempt. The one that I really need that for is HBO Max. The fact that there is a children's control. Because I mean, I know what the access that I had to HBO as a kid was was definitely unfettered, and probably, I think I turned out okay, but I don't need my 6-year-old seeing some of the stuff that I found. And now it's so much more readily available. It was basically, we would go into HBO Max and he would see that I had been watching South Park and he would just say South Park. And I'm like, he recognizes that's a cartoon. I'm like, he can't watch that,
Yeah.
not at 6. Maybe your oldest can watch it, but even then, well, I don't know, because you guys live in Colorado, that probably feels like it's like a documentary.
It's part of our culture.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a good point. It is something to think about. I think here's the thing: is I would rather Gone with the Wind have some kind of disclaimer or something than it goes away entirely. But go ahead. Sorry.
One quick point. I suspect, I don't know this is just a guess, but maybe kind of a semi-educated guess, that the reason why Apu isn't back is because what do you do with him? That character is going to be under the microscope. And it's funny, I think, gosh, it might have been the comedian who led to the cancellation of the character, at least under, Hank Azaria's version. he was describing what you could do with the character. And none of his descriptions were remotely funny or interesting or engaging. I'm like, well, you really want to do that? You want to make a show that's been on for about 1,000,000 years and make it not funny? Because it's going to fit your worldview? Is that what we do? So maybe they can't make funny scenarios because they know they're going to be under the microscope, and they just say, screw it, we'll leave them out.
Yeah.
We'll do what's his name, Willie, the stereotypically Scottish
groundskeeper Willie.
groundskeeper.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's yeah. You don't get the outrage over groundskeeper Willie or the Fighting Irish logo. You know, it's you get that. And because we've mentioned it a few times, I guess that comedian's name was Harry Kondablu, and I don't think I said it right, but it is very easy to not remember because he's just the guy who did the documentary about Apu. And then just looking it up so that we could talk about it. That was 2017. So it's like 5 years ago now. I can't believe it's that long ago. But I don't know. I guess I feel like we'll get more of that. And, here's the thing, I guess once you're right, once a character like Apu is under the microscope, whoever's doing that voice, I mean, it is very, it can be considered stereotypical for him to say, you always said, come again, I mean, in that voice. So, yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's, I guess it's easy enough when your show's been on for 30 plus years and you have enough characters to choose from, you can move away from a few of them, but I don't quite know what the fix is there. In terms of talk, you've been out there, this book came out a couple months ago. You've been out there talking about it for a while, and I'm sort of interested. Has there been much pushback where, whether it's in an interview or just somebody who read it on social media, do you find that there's something consistently that you're hearing? And it doesn't have to be from the left. It could even be somebody that's also center right like yourself. Is there something that you think that people feel like, oh, you're a little carried away with this? Or in general, has the feedback really been like, oh yeah, this is all the stuff that I've seen going on over the last, decade or so?
I hate to say this, but it's been universally, consistently positive. But I also think that part of the problem is that the people who I'd love to read it, who maybe disagree with me, haven't read it. That's my guess. I'd love to have that feedback. I'd love to have it back and forth. If I find someone who doesn't like my book or has some real issues, I'm probably invite them on my podcast. I just interviewed a pretty left of center film critic who's a nice fellow. We've kind of chatted in the past a little bit, but I want to get more into that, like have people with differing views on my show, maybe even just, interview on my website and just kind of have those conversations, because I think they're important. And I hope, and I'm keeping them as extremely civil, not kind of not going off on tangents or attacking or anything, because I don't want to do that. I think that'll do more damage than good. But I would love people to kind of have feedback on the book that maybe I didn't think of, or maybe, I missed a spot or something. But everything I've read is sort of like, that's what's going on. Some people called it chilling. Some people have enjoyed it. One guy read it and is rereading it now as we speak. I thought that was kind of crazy, but God bless him. So I don't know. I tried to write it as entertainingly as possible. I don't want to be dry. There's some quips in there and things like that. So I don't, so.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and you didn't make this comparison, but, I was thinking a lot about the last fall there was what I thought was a good Ghostbusters reboot in Afterlife, and but your book talks about what I think is universally seen as not a good reboot, which was the all-female one. Which the fact that it was all-female, I don't think was the problem. I think that those are some very talented, very funny women. I just think that the script was not great, and its approach didn't work. So you also in the book talk about why Wonder Woman did work so well. And obviously they're very different properties, but if you had to isolate it, what is it fundamentally? What was the problem with Ghostbusters? Was it as simple as, well, you took it and you made them all girls? Because for me, it's somewhere beyond that. Even if you're like, this is who's going to be in it, you had the cast first and then wrote the script. That's still not the problem. But what do you think is the fundamental problem with why that Ghostbusters didn't work?
I have a bland answer, but I think hopefully a better follow-up. One was good, one was not good. I think with the Ghostbusters film, I think there was the sense maybe across the board that they didn't have a killer product. And I think they kind of leaned into the victim status pretty darn quickly. And I also think that if there was all the negative buzz and the Comic-Con gang was not happy and we want our old Ghostbusters back and it's for guys, not for ladies.
Yeah.
I think that mostly goes away if they drop a really funny, really hip, really clever trailer. I think it just crushes the bad buzz. But they dropped the trailer that stunk and it was bad. And then people pounced on it. So I think with the Wonder Woman film, a year later, it's a really good movie. Gal Gadot was so insanely perfect in that role in so many ways. Not just she's pretty, obviously, but she's good comic chops and she's a good action heroine and she's believable and in this unbelievable role. I kind of just get the sense that sometimes when you take up the woke brigade, there's a sense that the product in question just isn't up to snuff and you need a plan B. And it was so funny because the whole Ghostbusters calamity happened just before Wonder Woman, again, like a year or so.
Yeah,
after.
about a year. Yeah.
And so I was waiting for they're going to do the whole Ghostbusters routine. We need a female hero and this is empowering and how dare you critique it. And if you don't love the trailer, then maybe you hate women. They didn't do any of that. And Gal Gadot didn't do any of that. She's a pretty apolitical star. And it was good. Conversely, the sequel was terrible.
Oh,
so, I don't know what happened there. So
one of the worst movies I've seen, and that was like indoor movie theaters weren't open in Los Angeles at that point. And we went to go see it at the drive-in, and we were so excited.
Yeah.
And it was like, we were able to get popcorn. We were able to be there and watch the movies. I was like, everything about the movie-going experience was great, except for the movie that they showed us. Yeah.
So, I mean, so I can't. It's almost impossible to know why a film isn't good or why a film is good. There's so many different factors. And again, if they could. People smarter than me, if they could figure it out, they'd be doing it, and they'd be fixing it, and we'd have all great movies. Yeah. But I do think there's this sense of when we're not confident in the finished product, we need some sort of attack mechanism. That was my sense. And the media played right along. I mean, the Washington Post was barking at anybody who didn't love the movie sight unseen. And then there was sort of as I mentioned in the book, sort of a whisper of the reality from Deadline.com after the movie opened poorly or just opened weakly. And they said, yeah, this is not what people were looking for. Maybe this was the wrong approach. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. And, I think that the fact that when people did actually see the movie, I think that's when it was like, oh, okay, I guess. Yeah. And, the funny thing you're talking about, Wonder Woman, of course, you had built in the fact that she stole a movie called Batman vs Superman from both Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the best parts of that movie, whatever people think of that movie. And there's a wide range of opinions on that movie. Everybody was like, yeah, but Wonder Woman was great, And I think that's really what it comes down to. Let's see. We have our pal, Farad Muhammad. That first trailer was awful. The messaging was all over the place. The movie was a reboot and a remake, but the trailer had title cards that made it look like it would be a sequel. I think that the casting of Chris Hemsworth, I think, was the one thing I liked about that movie. I thought that his part was funny. But in general, I remember watching it. Look, it wasn't as bad as Wonder Woman 1984. It was not like the worst.
I agree. I completely agree.
It just wasn't good. And it wasn't, it was just like, oh, it's kind of a letdown, but I don't know what was missing from it.
But I also think that audiences right now are getting more annoyed at the woke marketing. Look at the last James Bond movie, which I did not think was woke at all. You could pick
the movie itself. I don't think was. No.
But the marketing for like a year and a half, and it was delayed because of the pandemic.
That's true. The marketing went on for like
Sean Connery was a rapist in the early Bond films, and these are not Bond girls. You can't use that term anymore. And the new 007 is a black female agent, and she was integrated beautifully in the story. I didn't have a lick problem with that.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things we talked about on the show, actually, with our pal Sam Whitfield, is that going into it, I think that was the character where we're like, oh, what's this going to be? But she was actually great, I thought, the new 007.
She was fine.
I thought that movie was good, but you're right, the marketing, and I think that's what we're seeing. You used an example of a movie in the book. Now I forget because I didn't take a note on it, but the marketing only featured women that were in the cast, and I can't remember what it was.
Terminator Dark Fate.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And that's the most recent one. So you have Arnold in it, but it's like, yeah, let's forget about Arnold.
Yeah, listen, Sarah Connor comes back. That's cool.
That's
Put her
great.
front and center.
Yeah.
Then these two other women who obviously definitely had a role in the movie, but you got Schwarzenegger, who's been a star for 40 years. He's kind of a draw, I think. I mean, if you're going to make a Terminator movie,
I mean, yeah,
plus
exactly.
he's great in the movie, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
right,
it was odd.
exactly. So, yeah,
And the
that's
picture
a great
looks like
example
this.
where it's
It,
like, why wouldn't you put him in there?
yeah,
I mean, if this was like, I guess if this had been like the year where the story about his housekeeper and the love child, if it was that year, okay, I get it.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
like he's been in a bunch of movies since then,
yeah,
So yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think that sometimes it's the marketing. A good example. We're talking about the Wonder Woman movie. The Birds of Prey movie, I thought was not particularly good. I think that you had a good character in it, and some of the other characters were okay, but just the movie itself wasn't good. And I don't think that movie didn't. I mean, a Harley Quinn movie ought to have done well, but for some reason that one didn't. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. That had a little bit of Ghostbusters, like a whiff of that marketing.
yeah,
I know Ewan McGregor was doing the talk show circuits about how the women are now in charge, and like, just you can say it's a good movie and stuff, but stop pandering to us and stuff. And I think often, and this was an example with the Avengers movie Endgame. Sometimes the pandering actually pisses off the people it's supposed to be appealing to. The Mary Sue which is sort of the off the charts super woke website. They were grumpy about that all female Avengers moment in the Endgame movie. Like even they didn't like it. Even they saw it was pandering. So you got to be with sometimes the woke goes into overdrive and it pleases no one instead of pleasing just some people.
yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Mary Sue, because I remember early in the book you reference the Bechdel test, which I think a lot of people don't know what it is, and it seems like such a it's not a great way to determine the value of something is, but I guess it are two women in a scene together where they're not talking about a man, and I think that that's something that I look, I can understand that existing, but it's also like that shouldn't make or break your movie, because what if the movie just isn't about the women? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I think if I had to guess, American Pie probably doesn't pass that, because the scenes with the girls, who in the first one, they were well cast. And I think that the girl characters are actually good in the first American Pie. I'm only talking about the first one.
Mm.
And but they're probably mostly talking about guys in it. But I think it's still their story. And you have sort of, I think if you're, if you're writing papers for media studies and you're applying things like that, I think it's fine. But I don't think that should become a determining factor of like, well, this script should get made,
Yeah.
And I think when you apply academics to the creative side, I think that good things can't happen, basically,
One of the most shocking examples to me, and this might be 5 or 6 years ago, is there was a movie called Neighbors a few years back with Rose Byrne and Seth Rogen. I thought it was very funny.
Oh
It's
yeah, I
sort of
remember that.
a
Yeah.
new young couple. They move in next to a fraternity house and all heck
Yeah.
breaks loose. Good
Yeah.
laughs.
Zac Efron was in it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember that movie.
very
Yeah.
strong. And then they made a sequel, and it wasn't very funny. It was called
No.
Sorority Rising.
That's
And then I
right. It was
read,
not good. Yeah.
no, it was not good. It made no money either. And I
Yeah.
read about the production, sort of the behind the scenes, and how they basically hired these two female script writers to oversee the project to make sure it was empowering. And I'm thinking, you're making a raunchy R-rated sex comedy with drinking and drugs and all sorts of mayhem. Does that have to be empowering, or does that have to be funny? Because if you want to go the
Yeah.
empowering route, it makes it maybe a little harder to be funny. And if you could do both, I guess God bless you. But it just seemed like such a colossal mistake to kind of look to that movie and that franchise. And it's a franchise no more. It killed the whole thing.
Yeah.
As well, we need them empowered. You know, I don't want every female character to be terrible and to be thin and to be wimpy or whatever. I've got women. Everyone has women in life that they care about and they want to, be well represented. But it just seemed bizarre to kind of that's the hill to die on, and the franchise died as a result.
It's interesting because it's somebody who is so vilified now, but there was an episode of Louis C.K.'s show where Louis
Careful.
I know, but he starts dating a heavy comedian, and it's such a well-written character because it's real, and it was, you don't usually, usually it's, if you're a heavier actress, you're going to be the fat best friend.
Yeah, yeah.
You might get a lead like Rebel Wilson, but then, that's few and far between. There's not a lot of Rebel Wilsons out there. And I haven't seen her since Cats. I hope she's okay. I worry about everyone who was in Cats because, uh, you know, but, and it's, you don't have that sort of wide representation of female characters, I think. And it's interesting because you're turning so many like comic books and things into movies and TV shows, but a place where you would have really great, strong female characters would be a comic book like the X-Men. And where at one point the character, it was like 6 women and Wolverine was basically the team,
Yeah.
and it's like, you don't think that they learned the lessons from like what worked, and it should be, I mean, look, it's the same studio. You should know why Wonder Woman works, why Birds of Prey didn't work as well, and honestly, why the second Wonder Woman didn't work. It's very simple. This is a bad script.
Yeah.
But
I've been obsessed with Modern Family in recent months. My whole family's been rewatching the show.
sure.
I think we've circled back. We may be rewatching shows we just watched, but the show's so good we don't care.
Yeah.
And I think about how they represented different groups, and the gay character Cam and Mitch, who I couldn't love anymore. They're just
They're
so
great.
adorable and sweet, but they're deeply, deeply flawed in many interesting ways, and all the different characters have their own flaws. And I think, well, here's 2 gay characters. One is a straight actor playing a gay character. So that's already sort of a no-no. But I wonder if it's written today, would they be that deeply flawed? Because it made them so relatable and so human and so endearing. And that's why the Apu thing bugs me, because, we want to go to a place where you can have a Black female lesbian character who's evil or good or in between. Like, I want all the shades of the storytelling arc in these characters. That's equality. But I think if we're afraid to kind of go there in certain areas because there'll be an outrage about it, then that's wrong. People are still complaining about Silence of the Lambs and the killer is a trans figure, or I don't know the very specifics, but that movie's been vilified for that character for 30 years. And it's one of the best horror movies of all time. It's one of the best movies of all time, I think.
And I believe it's based on a real serial killer.
Right. So
do that with.
So you had a movie
skin, yeah.
With let's just say it's a trans person. I don't know the exact. Forgive me for that. Let's just, for argument's sake, say it's a trans figure. Who's the monster? Who's the villain? Who's the killer? So what? I mean, the broader argument is let's do other stories where the trans person is a scholar or a cop or a fire person or another killer. I don't want creativity to kind of be clamped down. I want it to flow. I want it to, blossom. And, and if there are trans people in Hollywood writing stories, then they'll probably write stories where they're more heroic. And if those stories are good, let's hear them. Let's share them. Let's show them.
Yeah, and I think that I think you're right. I hadn't really thought about that. You're talking about Mitch and Cam from Modern Family, that you might write those characters very differently today, and they would not be as interesting. If Mitch didn't have his clowning side, or no, it's Cam. That's Cam. Who, if he never showed up as, I think, Fizbo the clown, and it's just like, oh no, that's too weird. But it's one of the funniest things about his character is his love of clowning.
And his high pitched squeal voice when he's upset. And then Mitch can be kind of cruel sometimes. And
that's true.
Sort of very not subjective, but sort of dismissive. But I love them. If they moved next door to me, I'd be popping champagne. Like I get to hang out with Cam and Mitch all the time,
Yeah, and occasionally the character that Nathan Lane would play as their friend. I mean, he's very over the top, but it's it's Nathan Lane, so you can kind of get away with it. It's a great point. It'll be interesting to see. One of the things, and we referenced it. You talk about this cancellation of old films and old content, and that's sort of what we were talking about earlier. And I mean, for me, there's not a lot of instances of things that have gone away. I think that when you were a kid too, I mean, Disney's Song of the South was around, and it hasn't been for quite a while. It's been available in other countries, but and I've seen it within the last 20 years, and you can understand why it went away. But I'm surprised that trend didn't continue when they saw that. When Disney Plus was about to launch, they went through and they tweeted each year that they had a movie come out, and they just skipped that one. They didn't talk about it. And at one point they were going to release it with a documentary that really went into like, here's the context of it, here's what we think about it now. And it's like I was saying earlier, I think that there's a lot of value in seeing something that was created at that time. But are you worried that even though that trend, that seems to be the most high profile thing of a film that really just disappeared, do you feel like we're not out of the woods and there will probably be, something like, just to use the example, I mean, I don't know that Blazing Saddles would ever go away, but it's one that you can take a look at and, someone would make the case as to why it should,
I think when it comes to big tech censorship, if you had told me 5, 10 years ago that there'd be major stories breaking in the news that were not debunked and were very clearly either true or very possibly true, and they would go away during an election cycle, I'd say you're crazy. So I don't think anything's off the table. And I think that we live in a culture right now where the academic class, the media class, the Hollywood class would either cheer on these cancellations or just lay down and let them happen. That scares me. And those three bodies have a lot of power in our culture. So we're not there yet. I'm glad we're not there yet. We may never get there, and I hope so. But I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. And it takes one cultural flashpoint. I mean, look at everything that changed after the George Floyd's his death and everything. I mean, now when you go on Netflix, there's a Black channel and the sort of Hispanic voices and things. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just is. That changed. That's across Hulu. That's across Amazon. We've seen dramatic changes in police enforcement, the way that police are viewed, the way that pop culture views police, crime across the country from one death.
Yeah.
You don't think there could be another example of that happens in our culture that forces such a radical reconfiguration of life? I think it's very possible.
Yeah, no, that's I again would like to think that you're wrong, but it is very possible. Again, Farad Muhammad wants to wonder if Disney would consider it worth the time and money to remaster and digitize Song of the South for Disney Plus when it wouldn't draw as many people as a mediocre episode of The Mandalorian or 5 of the episodes of Book of Boba Fett. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's also like, where's the money in it? And it's true, when the talk was about putting Song of the South out with a documentary attached, it was not a particularly high point for Disney. I think that was long enough ago. It was before they bought Marvel and Fox and Star Wars. And, so yeah, Disney's in a different business now, but I don't know. I just think that there is something to be learned from it, from a movie like that. And, it's, the casualty is really that it took a long time, but the Splash Mountain ride is going to go away because of those characters that are featured in that movie, so
but that kind of thing doesn't help anyone. It really doesn't. And I think that the amount of people who are genuinely outraged and it ruins their day, I suspect it's very small. I really do. I think we feast on this outrage, but I don't think it's real. I mean, and if it is real, we should be more outraged about more real things that are going on in the culture. I don't know. I'd rather my son watch Song of the South and then he and I have like a great conversation afterwards and discuss it. Some of the songs may be beautiful. Some of the characters are interesting, sort of the glaring lack of context, why it matters, why people are outraged by it, why people are upset by it, why it took so long to be able to see it again. I think those are all healthy conversations. And I mean, I just prefer a society where we can have those conversations. We can have access to art. That's problematic, to use the left's favorite word.
Yeah, I think problematic doesn't mean that it should be destroyed. I mean, I think it's certainly worth talking about. If a movie comes out now that's problematic, you can certainly still talk about it. As we start to wind down, one of the things you talked about later in the book, you chatted with somebody that I know pretty well, Don Jameson, about this idea that comedians will go after other comedians, and I sort of touched on it with Shane Gillis. That's I think the surprising thing is just how quick other comedians are, and maybe it's just as simple as like, well, that's more stage time for me.
Yeah.
That's a a lead in a Hulu series that I might get,
Mhm.
but it seems like there's no fraternity, there's no brotherhood and sisterhood. That, I mean it more in the general,
Yeah.
non-gender sense. It seems like, yeah, everybody's kind of in out for themselves, and if they can fuel the woke mob, as it were, more, they're happy to do it.
I think it's interesting because I think this doesn't count for everyone for sure. Maybe a very small part, minority, but I think some comedians are doing that out of kind of self protection. I think about Judd Apatow, who I love his early movies. I think they're brilliant. They're funny. They're outrageous. Their body. They're revealing. And they actually have a lot of heart too.
Yeah.
But I wonder if he thinks I just made a whole bunch of white male, white privilege, brotastic movies. I could be canceled next. So I'm going to be pretty woke, and I'm going to kind of, lay the hammer down on Louis C.K. because he made jokes about the Parkland high school students, which, by the way, was actually a really kind of smart joke. His joke was basically saying, these people survived this horrible incident. How did that make them gun experts? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like that's a risky joke to tell, and it's a risky topic to broach, but it does matter, because they aren't experts. They're just, God bless that they survived that awful
Yeah.
day. But that doesn't mean now they may have gone and done tons of research in theory. That's perfectly fine. They may have gone, educated themselves in ways, and maybe they are experts today based on whatever. But sort of out of the gate, we just christen them as experts. Like, and so his joke was a tough one. And Louis and Judd Apatow was, clutching his pearls about that. But maybe Judd Apatow's a little worried that his movies had a lot of white people in them, and the diversity was pretty low, and that they were very sort of, they have filled with content that you wouldn't get approved today. So maybe he's thinking like that. Mark Maron has said some similar things because he's got some pretty rough material back in the day, and not so long ago. Maybe he's woke now because he's afraid that they'll drudge up stuff about him. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you're talking about Judd Apatow, and Seth Rogen has sort of, said some things that just seem very inconsistent with
Yeah.
who he appeared to be not too long ago. But you're absolutely right. It could come out of fear. And, you were talking about how there aren't really the good R-rated comedies that there used to be. And it's mostly because Judd Apatow doesn't make them,
That's
you
right.
know? And
Well,
I
Todd
think,
Phillips.
right, yeah, and I think that, the one with Pete Davidson, King of Staten Island, I think that there were things that were good about it. I think he can still, look, he still has it in him to make good movies, but
Hmm.
honestly, like, even Funny People has like a whole third act where I was just like, this movie fell apart. Like, what is this story? Like,
Yeah.
there's a great part of the story. So I don't quite know what it is, where it's like, I'm not really sure what he's doing, but I think it's all in his head. And I mean, obviously, a very quick, very funny brain that he has, but I don't know how he's turning that out. I mean, and I think very similar point with Seth Rogen. It was nice to see Seth Rogen in this Pam and Tommy Lee show because I hadn't seen him in so long. Because
Mhm.
it's just, I don't know. It's been a while, I think, since Seth Rogen has been in something where I'm like, oh yeah, I really want to check that out.
Well, look
So
at Seth Rogen and Amy Schumer and Will Ferrell. These are big comedy stars. When was the last time
yeah,
they made a big comedy?
yeah. No, I
Right.
know. I mean, Will Ferrell's not friends with Adam McKay anymore because he didn't put him in his Lakers show. Which, by the way, I'm like, wouldn't you? I mean, wouldn't wouldn't Will Ferrell be able to play a part that John C. Reilly can play? I mean, well enough. If you want him, look,
Yeah.
it's put it this way: if you want to stay friends with someone, sometimes you have to make that decision. But
I also
I
thought
get,
it was a very thin skin moment. But I've
yeah,
spoken to artists over the years, and often they're very sensitive. Often their skins are very thin.
yeah,
It may be sort of a side effect of them being very empathetic and artistic, and just it is
yeah.
what they are.
Well, I love this context comment from our friend Lynn B from the old DMZ Dennis Miller show. My two Christians, we are both here, and then Chris Christie, not that Chris Christie, but a different Chris Christie, says he misses the HE double hockey sticks out of me and Dennis. The country has taken a shitty turn since you guys left. I didn't go anywhere. Dennis is the one who, if you follow Dennis on Instagram, he was in Sri Lanka for like 6 weeks and it looked like he had a great time. So if you want Dennis, you can find him. He's just really on Instagram, and so you might not hear from him for months. I actually talked to him today though. He's doing very well. Christian, there's obviously so much of this that we can continue to talk about, but I know we're going to continue our tradition in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to talk to you the day after the Oscars. And I'm so glad that we switched to the day after the Oscars, because boy, it's hard to watch that in real time at night. And, the fact that I might be able to fast forward through it a little bit. And, look, I understand. It'll be interesting to see, because I understand that that's a TV show and you want people to watch it. But man, did they cut a lot of categories out that seem to have really upset the Hollywood community. And I don't know what the fix is, but I think that the bigger problem watching that show will probably be what they made room for in terms of the content.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So I look forward to talking about that. But the final thing I wanted to talk to you about is this is not related to your book. And we did talk about your great book, Virtue Bombs. I need to give myself credit, something that you and I share in common. This was a point that I made in 2011 on Facebook. I saw this in my Facebook memories recently, and I know you had a run-in with this crowd. And I said, 2 minutes in, I was thinking Bob's Burgers is one of the worst shows I've ever seen. 2 minutes later, I was bordering on Bob's Burgers is the worst show I've ever seen, but I'm afraid to commit, mostly because of the 2 times that I've seen the show Glee. So that's a very 2011 reference.
Wow.
But you were talking about the feedback that you didn't get from this book, but boy, you stepped out on Bob's Burgers, and what happened to you?
I don't take it seriously. It was just a quip, I guess, but it's kind of a death threat.
Yeah.
So I basically said that the show has lost its mojo. No, I love the show. The show is an institution in my family. We watched the best episodes a dozen times. We watched every episode, but last season was rough, and this season is rougher. And listen, no show lasts forever. No show can hit its prime forever. The Simpsons has laughs still, but it really is a very different show than it once was, and I don't enjoy it as much. So there's no harm in saying maybe it's time to step away, take a break, take a knee, call it a show. No show should go on indefinitely, and no show can go on indefinitely and stay great. But that was apparently not.
It was apparently
I was loading my review of the new season with all these different caveats. It wasn't like I was trashing the show. And I got 2 or 3 of the most angry, grammatically inert responses. So if I actually disappear for that reason, I don't know.
Well, Lynn B apparently has read your book, and she says it's so well written, because I haven't written a book, so she has to be talking about you, because So
Lynn is an absolute sweetheart. So
we love Lynn B. We always have.
I would say that before the kind words.
But now you're like, now you really like her.
Now she's in my will, but there's no money in my will. So
yeah, that's all right. Just copies of your book that you can leave to her.
Dog-eared copies of Virtue Bombs.
Well, Christian, the book is called Virtue Bombs, and I appreciate you talking about it. And I'm sorry it took me a little while to read it, but I wanted to read it before I talked to you, because I feel like we could have had this conversation if I hadn't read it, but I knew that actually getting the chance to delve into it would go a long way. And I hope people are inspired to find it. Now, you said that you don't feel like you really want to write another book at this point. But could you see, sort of, expanding on these themes, whether it be, just articles on your site, maybe, as opposed to, republishing the book or something. But I feel like it sort of sets, it sets you in a direction where there's a lot to continue to talk about, maybe as soon as Oscar night,
Yeah. I mean, I've been carrying on this conversation on my website and my podcast, Right on Hollywood. So it continues. I wish it didn't continue. I wish I would have to write about something else, because ultimately this is a depressing topic, but it needs to be explored. It needs to be discussed. And I genuinely think it matters. I think when the biggest comedian of all time today, Dave Chappelle, is under significant attack, that matters, because what message does this send to the club comics who are just trying to make a living, and what they can say and what they can't say? It matters.
Yeah, no, that it absolutely does, and I don't know what the fix is for some of the things, and I think you're very fair in the evaluating of all of it, really, your evaluation of it, because I think a lot of this stuff does start in a good place. Some things are very well intentioned. You talk about the Me Too movement, that taking out somebody like Harvey Weinstein is very important.
Bravo.
Because it's just when it and this is me stealing this from Dennis Miller, but then when it got to the fact that somebody had a bad date with Aziz Ansari once, that's Dennis's joke. So write
Yeah,
to him,
no,
if you can find him.
but the
But
good jokes have humor and
yeah,
truth in
but
them. So.
it's spot on, because it's like, yeah, you sort of you lose the thread sometimes, and I think that trying to get more people of color on film sets as directors, just the very small number of women even nominated for best director over the
Oh yeah.
years, I think that, and when there have been phenomenal films directed by women, it's not like they haven't been directing them. So I think that a lot of this starts in a good place, but it's so easy to see how politics taking up the wrong cause just can steer it in the wrong direction. And so I hope people continue this conversation with you, and I know they can find you on Twitter at Hollywood and Toto. And where do they find your show and your website and all of that?
Well, my website is hollywoodintoto.com.
Right.
And the podcast is Right on Hollywood. You can find it basically any place a podcast is found.
Right, exactly. And I'm sorry that we don't have the budget that the old radio show had, and I can't bring you on with songs by the band Toto. But that was one of Dennis's always favorites. We wasn't always Africa. Sometimes it was Rosanna. There were a few. We would
I go back and forth myself. So.
Well, Christian Toto, thank you so much for giving me some of your time, and I look forward to talking to you about Oscar night, because I don't know who else I'll be able to talk to about it at
I
all.
don't look forward to Oscar night, but I'm looking forward to the night. The
Yeah,
night
yeah.
after, so.
I look forward to watching it on YouTube TV the morning before
right.
I talk to you and fast forwarding through it all. Anyway, thanks so much to everybody in the chat. Some very kind words for me, but also some for Christian, and I'll allow it because I like him. You don't have to only compliment me. So thank you to everybody, and we'll see you next time on the Bladtcast.